I had 40 seconds before the dessert forks hit the table and the bullets hit his chest. My hand shook just enough to smear the ink as I folded the receipt into quarters. The paper felt impossibly thin, like it might dissolve before it ever reached him. Around me, the ivory pavilion hummed with the low, expensive frequency of wealth, crystal against porcelain, muted conversations about offshore accounts and second homes in the south of France, the whisper of designer silk against leather booth seats. Outside, Lagos traffic growled against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city blazing at full throttle even at 9 in the evening. But in here, everything was too warm, too still, the kind of suffocating warmth that made you feel like the walls were slowly leaning in. I walked toward table 1 the way a person walks to their own sentencing. Seo Junho sat with his back to the glass wall, Victoria Island skyline burning behind him like a crown no one had officially placed on his head. He didn't need one. He looked like he had been carved from something harder than marble, a sharp jawline, black hair swept precisely back, a dark suit that probably cost more than my father's entire pension. His hand rested flat on the white tablecloth, fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not impatient. Predatory. Beside him, Amaka Fontaine leaned in close, whispering something that curved her red lips into a smile. Her emerald earrings caught the candlelight and sent small fractures of green across the tablecloth like cracks in something beautiful. She looked like a woman in love. She wasn't. 22 minutes ago, I had heard her arrange his murder. The wine vault at the Ivory Pavilion wasn't technically a vault. It was a temperature-controlled room in the basement, all glass panels and amber lighting that made the bottles glow like objects of devotion. Chef Bassi had sent me down to retrieve a 2016 Chateau Lynch Bages for table 11. I was threading between rows of Bordeaux and Old Burgundy when I heard voices. A woman's voice, low and clipped, speaking in Yoruba so fast it felt like a blade being sharpened. I froze between 2 wine racks, my hand still on the bottle I had been reaching for. Table 1. The glass wall. He'll be settled by 9:15. My Yoruba was functional at best, good enough for the market, for small talk, for arguments with Auntie Ngozi about money. But fragments cut through clearly. Table 1. Glass wall. The others are in position. 1 at the bar, 3 near the kitchen. Then she switched, her voice dropping lower, shifting into something that sounded like French, fast and clipped and sharp, like she was compressing instructions into as few syllables as possible. I should have cleared my throat. Should have made my presence known, professional and unbothered. Instead I stood there, heart slamming against my ribs, and I listened. She switched back to Yoruba. The bottle in my hand had gone cold against my palm. When he orders dessert, they move. His back will be to the glass. 1 clean shot from the terrace and 3 more from inside. The air in the vault, climate-controlled to exactly 15 degrees Celsius, suddenly felt like an open freezer. She continued in French again, something fast and consonant-heavy that I couldn't track, but the tone was impossible to mistake. This wasn't conversation. This was a countdown. Heels clicked against the stone floor, moving toward the stairs. I pressed myself flat against the wine rack and prayed the shadows and glass bottles would swallow me whole. Through the gaps between 1,000-year-old vintages, I caught a glimpse of her, tall, immaculate, wearing a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than 6 months of my salary. Natural hair pinned up perfectly, emerald earrings catching the amber vault light. Amaka Fontaine, the woman currently sitting at table 1, laughing softly against Seo Junho's shoulder, playing the role of devoted fiancée to the man she had just arranged to have killed. She disappeared up the stairs. Her perfume lingered, something expensive and floral that now smelled to me like a burial arrangement. I stood there for 15 seconds. 20. 30. Waiting for my legs to remember they were mine to use. When I finally climbed back up to the main floor, the Chateau Lynch Bages completely forgotten, my brain was sprinting. Table 1, glass wall. 1 at the bar, 3 near the kitchen. When he orders dessert. I stepped back onto the restaurant floor and everything sharpened into horrifying focus. Table 1, corner booth. Seo Junho and Amaka Fontaine, Lagos's most whispered about couple. He was Korean underworld. Everyone in a certain circle knew it, even if no one said it out loud. She was the daughter of a West African crime dynasty. Fontaine blood ran through half the old money families on the island. Their engagement had been society page news for months. A power merger wrapped in flowers and champagne toasts. Or a murder dressed as a wedding. I scanned the room with new eyes, my serving tray held against my chest like a shield I knew couldn't stop anything. The man at the bar, mid-30s, dark Agbada over a fitted shirt, nursing a glass of cognac he hadn't actually sipped in 15 minutes. He wasn't watching the football highlights on the screen behind the counter. He was watching Table 1. 3 men near the kitchen entrance. They had been there for 20 minutes at least, menus open but never ordering. 2 had their backs to the wall. The third kept his right hand tucked inside his jacket. My heart kicked hard against my sternum. I looked back at Table 1. Seo Junho was laughing at something Amaka said, the sound low and private, completely unaware that the woman touching his arm had just orchestrated his execution. That in less than 30 minutes, when the dessert course arrived and the flambe distracted the room, 4 men were going to put bullets in him. I could walk away. Clock out early, tell them I was sick, slip out the back and let whatever was about to happen just happen. Men like Seo Junho didn't end up in my world by accident. He had built his empire on things I didn't want to think about. Maybe he had earned this. But then I thought about my mother lying in that hospital bed in Surulere, hooked up to machines that beeped her life away in small, steady intervals. I thought about every nurse who had stayed past their shift to keep her comfortable. Every doctor who had pushed back against the insurance gatekeeping her treatment. I thought about mercy. The kind no one earns. The kind given freely anyway. I cannot just let someone die. So I grabbed a receipt from my apron pocket, clicked my pen, and wrote 7 words that would either save his life or end mine. My reflection in the nearest wine glass looked like a ghost as I made my way toward Table 1. Each step felt like moving through deep water. I was aware of everything, the scratch of my uniform against my skin, the soft squeak of my shoes on the polished concrete floor, the way Amaka's laugh sounded like expensive broken glass. I approached from Seo Junho's right side. "You're open, sir." My voice came out professional. Steady. Like I hadn't just overheard a murder plot in the basement. Like my hands weren't trembling inside my sleeves. I set the crystal tumbler on the white tablecloth with practiced precision. The whiskey caught the candlelight, glowing amber. Then I did the one thing every server is trained never to do. I touched him. My thumb pressed against the back of his hand for a half second, less than a heartbeat, as I slid the folded receipt beneath his coaster. The contact was deliberate and brief and it violated every professional boundary between his world and mine. Seo Junho's eyes snapped to mine. They were darker than I had expected. Not cold exactly, but calculating, the eyes of someone who processed threat and intention the way ordinary people processed conversation. His gaze held mine for a beat too long, and something shifted in the center of my chest. Not attraction, not yet. Recognition. Like looking into the eyes of something wild that could choose, in the next breath, to either let you pass or tear you apart. "Read it," I mouthed. "Please." His fingers curled around the receipt, palm flattening over it completely. "Is something wrong with the service, darling?" Amaka's voice cut through the moment, sweet and venomous in equal measure, her eyes moving between us with a sharpness she was working very hard to conceal. Seo Junho didn't look at her. He lifted his glass, took one slow sip of whiskey, and with his other hand, unfolded the note beneath the table where she couldn't see. I stood there, tray clutched to my chest, watching his face for any reaction. Nothing. Not a flicker. Not a flinch. Just those dark eyes scanning 7 words. "Your fiancé sold you out." They're in position. Then his jaw tightened. Just barely. So small you'd miss it entirely unless you were looking, and I was looking at nothing else. Seo Junho set his glass down with a soft, final clink. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and completely controlled, the kind of calm that lives just one breath ahead of violence. "I'd like to propose a toast." Amaka blinked. Her smile flickered. "Now? We haven't even ordered dessert yet, June." "Now." He gestured toward me without breaking eye contact with her. "Another glass for my fiancé." "The same as mine." I hesitated, looking between them. Amaka's perfectly maintained face showed the first crack, a tightness pulling at the corners of her eyes, a subtle stiffening in her posture that she covered quickly. "I already have wine." "Then you'll have whiskey too." "Not a request." I walked back to the bar on something that felt like autopilot. My hands poured the second open with a steadiness that surprised me. When I returned and set the glass in front of Amaka, her red nails gleamed as she reached for it, and Seo Junho's hand shot out and closed around her wrist. "Let's switch," he said softly. "I want to drink from yours." "You drink from mine." The temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. Amaka laughed, too high, too quick. "That's strange even for you." "Is it?" His smile was the flat edge of a blade. "I thought couples in love did romantic things. Sharing. Trusting." He pushed his glass toward her, holding her gaze steady. "Or is there some reason you'd rather not drink from what I've been drinking?" The silence stretched. I stood frozen, tray against my chest, watching the emotions move across Amaka's face in rapid sequence. Confusion. Fear. Fury. And then something carefully blank, like a mask snapping into place. "Of course not." She picked up his glass with a hand that trembled the smallest, almost imperceptible amount. "To loyalty," Seo Junho said. "To loyalty," she echoed. They drank. Nothing happened. The whiskey wasn't poisoned. But the hesitation, the fractional pause before she lifted the glass, had confirmed everything the note had told him. Seo Junho set his glass down and looked at me. Really looked at me, taking in my uniform, my face, the fear I couldn't quite suppress. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara, sir." "Amara Osei." He said it slowly, like he was pressing it into memory. "Tell me, Amara. Do you believe in fate?" My throat tightened. I'm not sure, sir." "Neither did I." He leaned back slightly, one arm draped along the booth, his posture so casual it was its own kind of performance. "Until about 40 seconds ago." Amaka's face went white. And that was when I understood, standing there in the warm amber light of the ivory pavilion, that I had just started a war. The restaurant continued its elegant symphony around us, silver against porcelain, conversations about summer villas and portfolio performance, the live jazz trio in the far corner weaving something slow and melancholy through the room. But at table 1, everything had frozen. Amaka's emerald earrings caught the candlelight as she reached for her wine glass, her movement suddenly mechanical, like someone operating a body they had temporarily borrowed. Seo Junho sat completely still, a predator reading the direction his prey would move. "Amara." He said my name again, tasting each syllable. "How long have you worked here?" 8 months, sir." "And in those 8 months, how many attempts on a guest's life have you witnessed?" The question landed like a slap. Amaka's laugh came out too bright, too forced. "June, you're going to terrify the poor girl. She probably just overheard something and got nervous. Isn't that right?" Her eyes cut to mine, a warning dressed as sympathy. "Is that what happened, Amara?" Seo Junho's gaze never left mine. "You just got nervous?" I couldn't speak. The receipt was still in his hand, my handwriting visible against the white paper. Something shifted in the room. One of the men near the kitchen entrance stood up, his right hand sliding inside his jacket. At the bar, the man with the untouched cognac angled his body toward our table. Seo Junho saw it. I watched the calculation move across his face, cold, fast, and absolutely lethal. "I think," he said quietly, rising from his seat in one fluid movement, "we should discuss this somewhere more private." Amaka's hand shot out, fingers closing around his wrist. We haven't had dessert. I've lost my appetite. He extracted himself from her grip with surgical precision, then turned to me, and his expression changed completely. The composed dinner guest vanished. What replaced it was fury, or the performance of it, theatrical and sharp, the mask of a man about to publicly destroy an employee's evening. His hand closed around my upper arm. Hard. You, he hissed, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, spilled whiskey on a 14,000 naira shirt. I hadn't spilled anything. My tray had been empty. But the lie crystallized instantly, giving him a reason to grip me, to pull me away from the table without immediately raising alarm. The violence in his hold was real enough to make me gasp and theatrical enough to make the surrounding diners look away in second-hand embarrassment. I'm so sorry, sir. Sorry doesn't restore Italian linen. He yanked me forward, and I stumbled slightly, my hip glancing off the table edge. I want to speak to your manager. He pulled me toward the kitchen entrance, moving fast. Behind us, I heard Amaka's voice, sharp with barely masked panic she was dressing up as irritation. June, don't be dramatic. Just send her home. We can. I'm going to speak to her manager, he cut over her, his voice carrying across the restaurant like the crack of something breaking, and then I am going to have her fired. We were 10 feet from the kitchen doors. The 3 men near the entrance shifted, hands moving toward their jackets. I could see them calculating, was this part of the plan? Was Seo Junho just being his notorious self? Or had something gone wrong? 5 feet from the door, his grip on my arm shifted. His fingers found my wrist, pressing down against my pulse point until I could feel my own heartbeat hammering against his thumb. When we go through those doors, he said against my ear, his voice barely a breath, so close anyone watching would think he was continuing to berate me, you run left. Don't stop. Don't look back. Do you understand me? The kitchen door swung open. And the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the ivory pavilion in a single breath, not gradual, not flickering, but absolute and immediate, like a blanket thrown over everything at once. The jazz trio died mid-phrase. Crystal hit the floor somewhere in the dining room. A woman screamed. Seo Junho moved. 1 second I was standing upright. The next I was being propelled forward through the kitchen doors with enough force to drive the air from my lungs. Emergency lighting kicked on, dim red bulbs that turned the kitchen into a nightmare landscape of shadows and blood-colored light. The kitchen was chaos. Chefs shouted in a storm of languages, Yoruba, Igbo, French, as pans hit the floor and something heavy crashed somewhere beyond the crimson haze. Through the red light I could see figures moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with cooking. Left, Seo Junho's voice cut through the noise. I ran. My work shoes skidded on the tile as I bolted past the prep stations, past the industrial ovens radiating heat like open furnaces, past a row of stainless steel counters glittering red under the emergency lights. Behind me came the sound of impact. Flesh meeting flesh. A grunt of pain. Something metallic skittering across the floor. I risked a glance back. Seo Junho fought like violence was a language he had been speaking since he learned to walk. A man in kitchen whites lunged at him with a blade that was clearly not for dicing onions. Seo Junho caught the man's wrist, twisted sharply, and the knife clattered away. He drove his elbow into the man's throat with the precision of someone who had done it before, then used the man's falling body to absorb the impact of a second attacker. Both of them went down. 3 more men came through the swinging doors, not the ones from the dining room. These were wearing kitchen uniforms like camouflage. One of them spotted me. The girl, he shouted in accented English. Get the girl. Terror shot through me like electricity. My hand found something on the nearest shelf, a pan of hot oil sitting on the range. Without thinking, without hesitating, I grabbed it and hurled it at him. The oil caught him across the forearm and chest. His scream was raw and animal. He dropped to his knees, clawing at his burning skin. The smell hit me instantly, scorched fabric and something worse underneath, and my stomach lurched hard toward my throat. "Move, Amara." Seo Junho was suddenly beside me, his hand pressing against the small of my back, propelling me forward again. Blood streaked his white dress shirt in a dark diagonal slash, and I couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. We burst through another set of doors into the dry storage area. Heavy sacks of rice and gari were stacked floor to ceiling, creating narrow passages between the shelving units. The red emergency lighting barely reached in here, leaving pools of complete darkness between the rows. Footsteps thundered behind us. Voices shouted in Yoruba. Seo Junho pulled me into a gap between two shelving units, pressing us both flat against the concrete wall. The space was so narrow that my back was against his chest. My face turned sideways, pressed against the fabric of his ruined shirt. He smelled like expensive cologne and copper and something darker, adrenaline, maybe, or the particular scent that violence leaves on a person. His heartbeat against my shoulder blade was fast but steady. Not panicked. Ready. "How many?" I whispered. "Too many." His lips barely moved against the top of my head. The kitchen was full of them. This wasn't just a hit. This was a full occupation. 3 men entered the storage area. Their shadows stretched grotesquely across the walls in the red light. They moved methodically between the shelves, weapons drawn, knives and what looked like a garrote. They wanted this quiet. Seo Junho's arm circled my waist, holding me completely still. His other hand moved to his ankle and came back up carrying a compact pistol, small, black, and absolutely real. The nearest man was 5 feet away. 4. 3. I could see his face now in the crimson glow. Young, maybe mid-20s, with a raised scar cutting through his left brow. He was looking directly at our hiding spot. Time stretched like taffy. I felt every heartbeat, every molecule of air moving through my lungs. Seo Junho's finger rested on the trigger, his body coiled beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. The man took one more step forward. Then glass shattered somewhere in the kitchen, followed by shouting in Korean. The man's head whipped toward the sound. He gestured to his companions and all 3 moved back toward the kitchen doors. Seo Junho exhaled. The breath moved through his chest and expanded against my back. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stood there in the darkness, pressed together by the simple arithmetic of survival, while chaos continued to rage on the other side of the wall. "Your people," I whispered. "My people," he confirmed. He pulled back slightly, putting an inch of space between us. In the red light, his face looked like something sculpted from stone, all hard angles and sharp shadows. A cut above his left eyebrow leaked blood down the side of his face. "They'll create a distraction. We need to move now. The back exit is compromised." A voice came from behind us. We spun. A man stood blocking the path to the rear door, backlit by the emergency light, filling the doorway with a presence so large it seemed to bend the shadows around him. He was pointing a gun directly at me. Seo Junho went very still. "Colonel." His voice held something I couldn't quite read, not fear, but the heavier weight of betrayal. "Sorry, boss." The big man's expression was carefully empty. "Orders from above." "Whose orders?" Junesio sends his greetings. A pause. "And his apologies." "Nothing personal." The name came out of Seo Junho's mouth like a curse. "My brother." "Your half-brother," Colonel corrected quietly. "And he sends his regards." Seo Junho moved faster than physics should have allowed. He grabbed a sack of gari from the nearest shelf and hurled it directly at Colonel's head. The sack burst on impact in a white cloud of grain, turning the storage room into a blizzard. Colonel fired blind, the shot going wide, the report deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Then I was on the floor. Seo Junho's body came over mine, pressing me flat against the cold concrete, as bullets punched through the shelving above us and sent a cascade of rice raining down like pale confetti. Wood splintered. Something metal pinged off the wall. The world was gunfire and dust and the weight of a man who had decided, apparently, that I was worth protecting. Stay down. Then he was rolling off me and returning fire. The muzzle flash from his pistol strobed the storage room in white light. Kunnel went down, not dead, but hit in the shoulder. He clutched at himself, weapon clattering away. 2 more men came through the kitchen doors, and suddenly the air was full of bullets again. I pressed flat to the floor, hands over my head, rice grains biting into my palms as they rained down on me. Something hot grazed my upper arm, not a bullet, but close. The shock of pain made me gasp before I even fully understood what had happened. The back door. Now. Seo Junho's hand found mine, pulling me to my feet. We ran, stumbling through scattered grain that crunched beneath our shoes. The back door loomed ahead, heavy metal, marked with a glowing green exit sign. He hit it at full speed with his shoulder. It exploded open. Lagos night slammed into us, hot and thick and smelling of rain somewhere nearby. The temperature outside was not cold, but the wind that came off the street had a sharpness to it, and the sweat on my skin turned immediately clammy. My uniform, designed for air-conditioned elegance and absolutely nothing else, offered no protection from the sudden, violent transition between worlds. Seo Junho didn't slow down. He pulled me down the service alley behind the restaurant, our shoes loud on the wet asphalt. Behind us, the back door banged open again. A black SUV sat at the mouth of the alley, engine running, exhaust rising in the warm night air. Seo Junho wrenched open the rear door and physically put me inside. I landed on leather seats that smelled like new car and gun oil. He dove in after me, slammed the door. Drive. The word came out in Korean, sharp as a command. The SUV lurched forward. Through the rear window, I saw figures spill out of the restaurant's back entrance, too many to count, weapons raised. One of them aimed at our vehicle. The rear windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern but didn't shatter. Bulletproof glass. The impact sounded dull and distant, like knuckles on an aquarium. We sped away, leaving the ivory pavilion behind in a blur of streetlight and muzzle flash. Inside the SUV, silence. Nothing but our ragged breathing and the soft hiss of tires on Lagos Road. Seo Junho leaned forward, speaking rapid Korean to the driver, instructions, coordinates, I couldn't tell. Blood dripped from the cut above his eyebrow, spattering onto the leather seat. I looked down at myself. Rice grains still clung to my clothes and hair. My arm burned where something had grazed it, the sleeve of my uniform torn and spotted with blood. My hands were shaking. Not from fear anymore. From the crash of adrenaline leaving my body all at once, like a tide going out. You're hurt, he said. His attention shifted back to me. His English returned, clear and only slightly accented. I'm fine. You're bleeding. Let me see. I said but he was already leaning across, his fingers on my arm, pushing back the torn sleeve with a clinical detachment that somehow felt more intimate than concern. His touch was surprisingly careful. Considering what those same hands had done in the last 15 minutes, careful felt almost absurd. Graze, he said. You're fortunate. Fortunate? I laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. I just burned a man with cooking oil, got shot at in a rice storage room, and I'm in a bulletproof car belonging to a crime lord. That's your definition of fortunate? You're alive. His dark eyes met mine, and something moved in them, a fracture in the ice, small and precise. In my world, that is the only definition that counts. The driver said something in Korean. Seo Junho responded, then turned back to me. We're going somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't find us tonight. They meaning Amaka? And whoever Jun Seo is? His jaw tightened at the second name. My half-brother. Older by 3 years. Crueler by a lifetime. I was told he died in Shenzhen 2 years ago. A long pause. Apparently that information was incorrect. He said it with a flatness that made my skin prickle, the same clinical tone with which someone might discuss a failed business forecast. And Amaka was his from the beginning. The entire engagement was a setup. A way to get close enough to eliminate me without raising suspicion among the families. Another pause, quieter. The pregnancy is probably his too. Insurance. A heir to legitimize his claim if the assassination succeeded. I stared at him. You knew she was carrying someone else's child and you were still going to marry her? It was an arrangement, Amara. Territory, alliances, influence. Not love. He looked out the window at the city moving past. Love is a vulnerability I cannot afford. That sounds like an incredibly lonely life. He said nothing. Which was its own kind of answer. Where are you taking me? He turned back to meet my eyes. His expression was unreadable in the passing street light. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet in a way that somehow made it more unsettling than any of the violence had been. Home. Home was not a word I would have used for what we arrived at. Fortress, maybe. Stronghold, definitely. The property sat on a private peninsula overlooking the lagoon, surrounded by walls that looked like they had been designed to withstand something more than ordinary criminals. We passed through 2 separate checkpoints, both requiring coded authorization from the driver, who spoke into each intercom in Korean before the gates swung open. The main house was pure brutalism, concrete and glass, all uncompromising angles and absolute lines, not a single soft edge. Floodlights turned the surrounding grounds into a daylight approximation. 2 guards met us at the garage entrance, both armed, both speaking in clipped Korean to Seo Junho as we exited the vehicle. An elevator, key card, fingerprint scan, carried us up in silence. Seo Junho stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat still radiating from his body after everything we had survived together. When the doors opened into the penthouse, I stopped breathing for a moment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Lagos lagoon, black water stretching toward the far shore. The furniture was minimal and expensive, arranged with geometric precision. Everything was gray, concrete floors, steel fixtures, slate upholstery. Even the artwork on the walls was monochromatic. Abstract slashes of charcoal on white canvas. It was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, cold, sharp, and entirely purposeful. 3 men waited in the living room, all in black tactical gear, all armed. They straightened when Seo Junho entered and began reporting in rapid Korean, their expressions darkening as he listened. He barked 2 orders. 2 of the men left immediately. The third approached me and held out his hand. Phone. I looked at Seo Junho. Give it to him, he said. I need to call my mother. She's in hospital. She'll be worried. Your mother is asleep. He moved to the sideboard and poured amber liquid into a crystal glass. I had someone check on her 20 minutes ago. She's stable. The night nurse has her settled. The effortlessness of it, the casual omniscience, made something in my chest go cold. That doesn't mean I don't need to speak to her. Amara. He did not raise his voice. The command in it needed no volume. Give him the phone. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him exactly what he could do with his instructions. But the man in tactical gear was still waiting, and Seo Junho was watching me with those calculating eyes that missed nothing. I pulled my phone from my apron pocket and placed it in the man's palm. The guard left. The elevator doors closed behind him. And suddenly it was just Seo Junho and me in all that gray, expensive space. You can't keep me here, I said. Can't I? He took a slow sip of his drink. What is your alternative, Amara? Walk out into Lagos at midnight and hope the Fontaine network doesn't find you before dawn? Go home to your flat and wait for someone to put a bullet through your window? I didn't do anything wrong. You saved my life. He set down his glass and moved toward me, each step measured and deliberate. In the world I inhabit, that makes you either extremely valuable or extremely dangerous. Often both. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to hold his gaze. The people who tried to kill me tonight don't care that you were an innocent bystander. What they care about is that you cost them a fortune in planning and soldiers and credibility. And they will want to know exactly how much you saw, how much you heard, and whether you are going to be a problem. So rather than being their problem, I get to be yours. A ghost of something moved across his face. There is a difference between being someone's problem and being someone's responsibility. Not from where I'm standing. Then perhaps, he said quietly, you should move closer. The words hung between us, dangerous and deliberate. He stepped back, giving me air. Third door on the right. There is a bathroom and clean clothes in the wardrobe. Take whatever time you need. I went. There was no more elegant word for what my legs did, I fled. The guest suite was larger than my entire flat in Yaba. King bed and slate gray linen, a sitting area facing the lagoon, a bathroom that looked like someone had placed a spa inside a magazine. I locked the door behind me, then immediately felt foolish. A lock wouldn't stop Seo Junho if he chose to come in. This was his fortress. Every wall, every door, every carefully selected shade of gray answered to him. The bathroom mirror showed me a stranger. My braids had come half undone, falling around my face. Blood had dried brown at the sleeve of my uniform. My eyes looked too large, too dark, the eyes of someone who had just watched people die and survived things that had no right to have gone as well as they did. I stripped off the ruined uniform and stepped into the shower. The water came out scalding immediately, no sputtering, no waiting, just perfect temperature at the single turn of a dial. I stood under the spray and let myself cry. Just for a minute. Just long enough for the terror and confusion and exhaustion to escape in gasping sobs that the sound of the water swallowed whole. Then I stopped. Crying wouldn't change the mathematics of my situation. I was here. Going home tonight would be walking into whatever welcome the Fontaine network had prepared. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that felt like something from another economic bracket, I found the clothes, simple, practical things. Sweatpants, a loose thermal long sleeve, thick socks. Men's sizes, but someone had thought to include a belt. I dressed quickly, towel-dried my braids as best I could, and stared at my reflection again. Still a stranger. But a more determined one. I was heading back into the sitting area when I heard voices from the main room, Seo Junho speaking in Korean, low and controlled, and another voice crackling through what sounded like a speakerphone. The second voice was younger, with an edge to it that carried even through the door and the language barrier. I pressed my ear to the wood. I couldn't catch the words, only the tones. The person on the phone was taunting. Seo Junho was listening with the patience of someone composing a list. Then I heard three words I didn't need Korean to understand, Amaka. Juneseo. And, unmistakably, the word pregnant, said in English, dropped into the Korean conversation like a stone into still water. The call ended with a sharp command from Seo Junho. Something shattered against a wall. Glass, probably. Then silence. I waited a full minute before opening the door. He stood at the windows, one hand braced against the glass, looking out at the lagoon. He had changed, dark trousers, black shirt, barefoot. The cut above his eyebrow had been cleaned and covered. He didn't turn when I entered, but he spoke across the room. Juneseo sends his greetings. I moved closer carefully. Your half-brother. Older than me by 3 years. Meaner by a lifetime. His reflection in the glass looked like a carving. My father had him removed from the family 5 years ago. Juneseo had been stealing, significant sums diverted to a rival operation. My father offered him a choice, permanent exile or a permanent solution. Juneseo chose China and disappeared. Everyone assumed he had found a way to die there. Wishful thinking. He finally turned to face me. His expression was hollowed in a way I hadn't seen before, the performance of control with nothing warm underneath it. And Amaka was his from the start. The engagement was his architecture. She was the mechanism to get close enough to act. The pregnancy is his. Genetic testing from early on confirmed it wasn't mine. He paused. I knew the child wasn't mine. I didn't know June SEO was alive to be using this situation as leverage. I absorbed this. You knew she was carrying another man's child and you were still prepared to go through with the marriage. It was a business arrangement. The CEO family needed the Fontaine network's reach in West Africa. The Fontaines needed our capital and our protections in East Asia. A wedding cake on top of a hostile takeover. The words came out without bitterness. Just facts. What I did not anticipate was how deep the betrayal ran. Killing my men. Trying to kill me. Putting you in the crossfire. Something tightened in his jaw. That demands a response. What kind of response? His smile was a cold, clean line. The kind that ends with my brother's operation in ash and a maca in the ground beside whatever remains of it. The casual promise of destruction should have sent me running for that unlocked elevator. Instead, I heard myself ask, "What do you need from me?" Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, yes. And then calculation. And then, beneath both of those, something that might have been the beginning of respect. You want to help. I want my mother safe. I want to be able to go home without looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. I held his gaze. And I want them to pay. For the people they killed tonight. For the life you would have lost if I hadn't been in that wine vault at exactly the wrong moment. Or exactly the right one. He moved closer. You're not what I expected, Amara Osei. What did you expect? Tears. Demands to be released. Threats to go to the police. He studied my face. Not an offer to join a war against two of the most powerful criminal operations on the continent. I'm full of surprises. I'm beginning to understand that. His thumb traced along my jaw, the touch featherlight and deliberate. But understand this clearly, if you stay, if you help me, there is no returning to the life you had before tonight. The moment you walked to that table with a folded receipt, you stepped into my world. And my world does not release people gently. Then I guess I'm not going back. Something moved through his eyes, triumph, maybe, or recognition, or the beginning of something neither of us had a name for yet. No, he said quietly. I guess you're not. I woke to alarm screaming through the concrete walls. The room was still dark, red emergency lights strobing through the curtains, turning everything into a horror film's opening sequence. I sat upright, heart already hammering before I had fully processed what I was hearing. The door slammed open. Seo Junho filled the frame, no longer barefoot, but dressed in full tactical gear, a weapon in each hand, his face carved from fury. Get up. Now. I was out of bed before the command finished. What's happening? We're compromised. They found the location. That's impossible. We just arrived. Apparently not impossible enough. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the door. Move. We moved through the penthouse fast, other men in tactical gear appearing from doorways, speaking Korean in clipped bursts. Seo Junho barked orders without breaking stride, then pulled me into the elevator. The descent felt interminable. When the doors opened into the garage, controlled chaos greeted us. SUVs being loaded. Men running precise patterns. Someone calling coordinates into an earpiece. How did they find this place so quickly? I asked. Seo Junho didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on something across the garage, a man in a jacket holding a tablet, pointing at a screen, speaking with urgent economy. Then Seo Junho's gaze swung to me. And what I saw in it froze every drop of blood in my body. Suspicion. Cold, absolute, and thoroughly calculating. You, he said quietly. And the softness of it was far worse than any shout. You led them here. What? No. Search her. The order cracked like a whip. Two men materialized, their hands professionally detached as they checked every pocket, every seam of the borrowed clothing. I stood there, humiliated and shaking with anger that felt cleaner and sharper than the fear underneath it. Clear, one reported. Then how? Seo Junho grabbed my shoulders. His grip was iron. How did they find us, Amara? Who did you contact? What did you do? Nothing. The word came out in a ragged, furious exhale. You took my phone, remember? You locked me in a room with bars on nothing. What exactly do you imagine I could have done? The man with the tablet approached, speaking urgently in Korean. He held up the screen, showing a GPS map with a blinking red point. Seo Junho's eyes narrowed. Then widened. He looked at me. Then at the tablet. Then back to me. When did you last visit your mother? The non sequitur hit me sideways. Yesterday. Why? Did you collect her medication? Yes. From the pharmacy on Bode Thomas, during my lunch break. And understanding crashed over me like cold water dropped from a height. Oh God. Seo Junho was already moving, pulling me toward one of the SUVs. Get in. What does my mother's medication have to do with? Get in the vehicle, Amara. He put me in the back seat and slid in beside me. The driver pulled out before the door had fully closed. Her blood pressure medication, Seo Junho said. The package you collected. It was tagged. A tracker, embedded in the pharmaceutical packaging. They bet you would have it near you when things went wrong. But I didn't bring it here. It's at home in my bag. I stopped. Isn't it? The man with the tablet had moved to the front passenger seat. He turned and held up an evidence bag. Inside was a small pharmaceutical box with my mother's name on the label. Your bag, Seo Junho said flatly. The one you had in your locker at the restaurant. The one my men brought from the car after we left. Memory crashed back. I had put the medication in my work bag at lunch, planning to drop it at the hospital after my shift. In everything that had happened, I had completely forgotten it existed. I didn't know, I whispered. I swear to you I didn't know. The Fontaines did. His jaw was so tight I could see the muscles moving beneath his skin. They tagged the medication days ago. They anticipated you might become a loose end, perhaps you had witnessed something even before last night. A conversation. A meeting. They were covering contingencies. I had been carrying the tracker the entire time. I had led them straight to his safe house without even knowing I was doing it. I'm sorry, I said. The words felt pathetically small against the scale of what they meant. Sorry. He laughed, and the sound had something broken in it, something with a dark edge. Do you understand how many of my people were in that building when the breach happened? I said I was sorry. Apologies do not restore lives, Amara. His hand closed around my wrist, yanking me forward. The gun in his other hand was pointed at the floor of the SUV. But it was in his hand. And we both knew the distance between pointed at the floor and pointed at me was a single decision. The driver said something sharp in Korean, a warning, or a plea. Seo Junho ignored it. Give me a single reason, he said softly, why I should not end this right now. Terror locked my throat. This was how it ended, not in the restaurant, not in the storage room, but in the back of a moving car because I had been carrying a tracker I didn't know about. But beneath the terror was something else. Something angry and exhausted and entirely done with being afraid. Because my mother didn't ask for any of this. The words detonated out of me, raw and ragged. Because she is in a hospital bed right now, and if I die, she doesn't get her next dose. Because killing me doesn't solve your problem. It doesn't stop your brother. It doesn't bring back the people you lost. I met his eyes without flinching. It just makes you feel better for 30 seconds while your actual problem is still out there building strength. His finger rested on the trigger. Then do it. I grabbed his wrist and pressed the barrel against my own chest, feeling the cold metal through the thermal shirt. If that's what this is, then do it. But before you pull the trigger, send someone to Suralere, room 14, Mercy Hospital. Make sure Ngozi Ose gets her medication and her morning check. Because she is the only completely innocent person in this entire situation. We stared at each other, both breathing hard, the gun pressed between us like a vow neither of us had chosen to make. Outside, Lagos moved past the windows. Ordinary and blazing and entirely unaware of the two people negotiating a life at gunpoint inside a passing SUV. The man with the tablet spoke again from the front, urgent and insistent. Seo Junho's eyes never moved from mine. What did he say? He says the tracker has been disabled. We're clean. No one is following us. A long pause. Then he said, in the same quiet voice, he also says I am being an idiot. That if I eliminate the only witness who heard Amaka give the order, I lose the one person who can identify her voice. Confirm the details. Testify, if this ever requires a legal dimension. Am I going to testify? You're going to do whatever keeps you alive. He lowered the gun slowly. The absence of its pressure against my chest felt like the first real breath I had taken in 5 minutes. And what keeps you alive is being useful to me. So stop making me want to kill you long enough to actually be useful. Use me, then. The words came out steadier than I felt. Stop waving that gun around and use me. I was in that wine vault. I heard Amaka give specifics, names, positions, timing. I can give you everything I know if you can manage not to threaten me long enough to listen. Something shifted in his expression. The fury banked. Calculation returned. He released my wrist. I saw the marks his fingers had left, red indentations that would bloom into bruises before morning. Your mother, he said quietly. Mercy Hospital. Surrelir. He pulled out his phone and spoke in Korean. I heard my mother's name. I heard the hospital name. I heard what sounded like detailed medical instructions. When he hung up, he looked at me again. I've sent people. She will have her medication and around-the-clock care. The best doctors my money can access. Relief hit me so hard my vision blurred at the edges. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He turned slightly, looking out the window at the passing city. I purchased her medical debt 4 months ago. The hospital she is in, I have a financial interest in the facility. Shell companies. It has been mine for 2 years. The relief turned slowly, like milk going sour. What? Her treatment. Her equipment. Her next breath. He turned back, and his expression was carved from something colder than stone. All of it answers to me. Which means, Amara, that in the most practical sense possible, so do you. Not because I am cruel. But because that is the architecture of leverage in my world. The truth settled over me like a weight I hadn't agreed to carry. He had saved my mother not out of decency but out of strategy. Keeping me compliant. Keeping me grateful. Keeping me exactly where he needed me to be. You absolute bastard, I whispered. Yes. He didn't even have the grace to look uncomfortable. But I'm the bastard keeping your mother alive. So perhaps preserve the moral outrage for someone positioned to act on it. I wanted to say something that would actually wound him. Wanted to find the crack in all that granite and drive something sharp into it. But he was right. Hating him was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mother's life was in his hands in every sense that mattered. The SUV pulled into an underground structure, different from before, more industrial, more deliberately anonymous. We exited into a building that felt functional and temporary, a safe house, not a home. Seo Junho led me to a second-floor room. Single bed. A chair. A window with bars. Stay here, he said, moving toward the door. Someone will bring food. Or what? You'll threaten to switch off my mother's ventilator? He paused in the doorway without turning. I'll threaten nothing. I'll simply remind you that if you run and something happens to you, the financial instruments keeping your mother's care funded become complicated. You are, at present, the only person with both a claim on that debt and a reason for me to maintain it. The door closed. The lock clicked. I stood in the center of that bare room and felt the full weight of everything that had happened crash down on me at once. I was trapped. My mother was leverage. And the man I had saved tonight had revealed himself to be precisely what everyone whispered he was, someone who measured human lives in terms of their strategic utility. I should have let him die in that restaurant. But I hadn't. And now I had to live inside that choice. I sat on the edge of the bed, buried my face in my hands, and cried harder than I had in the shower, ugly, exhausted crying with no performance in it. Crying for my mother. For the people who had died in that kitchen. For the girl who had walked into work 8 months ago thinking that serving expensive food to wealthy people was the worst thing her life would ask of her. Then I stopped. Wiped my face. Lay back on the bare mattress. And began to plan. I must have slept at some point, exhaustion overriding fear the way it always eventually does. When I woke, pale morning light was filtering through the barred window, and someone had left a tray on the chair, rice, stew, water, all cold now. I ate mechanically. Tasted nothing. The lock clicked around midday. Seo Junho entered carrying a small first aid kit, dressed simply in dark trousers and a gray-fitted shirt. The bandage above his eyebrow was gone, revealing a thin cut that would leave a scar. He looked like he hadn't slept. "How is your arm?" He moved into the room like he owned it, because he did. "Fine. Let me see it." I said it's. He crossed the space in 3 strides, took my wrist, and pushed back my sleeve before I could finish the sentence. The graze had scabbed over, red at the edges but clean. He examined it with clinical detachment, opened the first aid kit. "I can manage it myself. Sit still." His fingers were careful as he cleaned the wound, careful in a way that sat strangely on a man who had shot someone in a storage room 12 hours ago. When he pressed a new bandage in place, his touch lingered for a moment on the bruises his own grip had left earlier. The red impressions of his fingers, now purpling into proper bruises. "I shouldn't have grabbed you like that," he said quietly. "In the car." It was, he paused, and I understood he was searching for words that weren't natural to him. "Disproportionate. You thought I had betrayed you." I reacted to that belief without sufficient evidence. He released my arm. "I don't respond well to betrayal. The history that explains why is not short." "Is that what happened with Junesio? He betrayed you, so your father exiled him?" Seo Junho moved to the window, hands in his pockets, the bars casting parallel shadows across his face. "Junesio diverted $2 million in product to a rival network. My father gave him the choice, disappear or be made to disappear. Junesio chose exile and vanished into Shenzhen. We believed he had found a way to die there, because men like Junesio tend to make enemies faster than they can manage them." A pause. "Evidently, he has been more careful than we gave him credit for. Building alliances. Turning people who owed loyalty to me. Positioning Amaka as the centerpiece of a years-long plan. And you were blind to it." "Entirely." He turned from the window. His expression was hollowed in a different way than it had been the night before, not the performance of control, but something more honest underneath. "I trusted no one, and still I was blind. That is the particular insult of it. You can't blame yourself for trusting your fiancée, even an arranged one. I didn't trust her. I barely knew her. The engagement was a transaction. Seo resources and protections in exchange for Fontaine reach across West Africa." He moved away from the window. "In my world, that is what relationships are. Transactions with better clothes on. Agreements disguised as affection. Love is a liability I genuinely cannot afford. Lonely is a liability too," I said. "Just a quieter one." He looked at me for a long moment. "Is that why you helped me? Because you recognized someone who had forgotten why any of it was worth fighting for?" "I helped you because letting someone die when I could prevent it felt worse than the risk. Even though that risk put you here. Even though." I stood, moving toward him until only a few feet separated us. Monsters don't bandage the wounds of the people they're using. They don't arrange medical care for dying women they could just as easily ignore. They don't hesitate when someone presses a gun barrel to their own chest and tells them to pull the trigger. I held his gaze. You keep telling me what you are. But what you do keeps telling me something different. The silence between us changed texture. Your mother, he said finally, looking at the floor. I had her moved this morning. Private suite. Better equipment. Specialist on call overnight. Why? He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, because you were right. She is innocent in all of this. Another pause, even longer. And because you asked me to take care of her. And I find I have considerable difficulty ignoring what you ask of me. The confession sat between us, fragile and sharp-edged. Let me see her, I said. Take me to the hospital to see my mother. I'll give you everything I heard in that wine vault, every word, every name, every detail, in exchange for an hour at her bedside. His eyes narrowed. You're bargaining with me. You're the one who showed me how leverage works. I didn't look away. I have information you need. You have access to the person I love most. Seems like a fair trade. Something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his face. You're learning fast. I'm motivated. He pulled out his phone, typed something briefly, pocketed it again. Done. A car will take you this afternoon. My people will accompany you. To make sure I don't run. To make sure no one puts a bullet in you before you finish being useful. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, Amara. I am glad you were in that wine vault last night. I'm glad you folded that receipt and brought it to me. And I am unexpectedly glad that you're too stubborn to stay afraid of me. I am afraid of you. I know. He looked back at me, his expression doing something complex and quiet. And you're still here anyway. That's a particular kind of courage. He left. This time, the lock didn't click. I stared at the unlocked door for a very long time. Weighing everything. The mathematics of my situation hadn't changed, my mother's life was still intertwined with his financial architecture, and the Fontaine network was still out there, very much aware that I existed and had interfered with their plan. Walking out of here didn't make me free. It just made me dead somewhere less comfortable. But there was also this, some quietly traitorous part of me didn't want to leave. Wanted to understand the man who held guns and bandaged wounds in the same pair of hands. Who measured loyalty in the cold arithmetic of leverage and then went and moved a sick woman to a better hospital room because someone had asked him to. I stayed. Not only because I had to. The private suite Seo Junho had arranged for my mother was on the top floor of Mercy Hospital, corner room, late afternoon light falling across the bed in long golden bars. The equipment was significantly better than what had been in her old room. The monitors were quieter and more precise. A specialist chart hung at the foot of the bed. My mother lay exactly as she had the last time I had seen her, small and still, her chest rising and falling with the gentle assistance of the ventilator. She had been in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks. The doctors were cautious about predictions. I pulled the chair close and took her hand. It was warm, but there was no answering squeeze. No flicker beneath her eyelids. Hey, Mama, I whispered. I'm sorry it's been a few days. I told her about the restaurant, leaving out the parts she would have prayed against. Told her I had met someone who reminded me, in strange ways, of her, stubborn, proud, trapped in circumstances they hadn't entirely chosen but refused to be destroyed by. Told her I was trying to do the right thing even when the right thing was terrifying. Told her I was going to find a way through this. When I finally stood to leave, the sun was setting beyond the hospital windows, painting the sky in deep amber and red. Seo Junho was waiting in the lobby when I came down, not with guards around him, just standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at his phone, looking, for one unguarded moment, like any other man. How is she? He asked as I reached him. The same. But stable. The equipment you arranged, the doctor said her numbers are better than they've been in weeks. He nodded once. Now your turn. Tell me everything you heard. So I did. All of it. The Yoruba fragments and the French instructions. The switch between languages. The specific details, 1 at the bar, 3 near the kitchen, the shot from the restaurant terrace when he ordered dessert. The names I had caught. The timeline. Seo Junho listened without interrupting, his expression becoming progressively darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then, Jun Seo has been building this for at least 18 months. The coordination. The placement of people inside the ivory pavilion. The double identity operation with Amaka. That is not a plan assembled quickly. What are you going to do? His smile was cold and geometric. I'm going to dismantle everything he has built. Starting with his wedding. Wedding? Jun Seo is consolidating his claim by marrying Amaka. Combining the Seo dissident faction with the Fontaine network under one structure. It creates legitimacy. Witnesses. It makes him significantly harder to move against without triggering a full-scale conflict between the families. He met my eyes, and what I found there sent ice down my spine, not threat this time, but the particular focus of someone who has decided what they are going to do and is simply informing the world of the fact. The ceremony is in 4 days. At the Fontaine estate in Ikoyi. You're going to attack the wedding? We are going to attend the wedding, he said. You and I. As guests. And we are going to burn it from the inside. The basement training facility beneath the safe house smelled like gun oil and the particular clean scent of concrete that has never been soft about anything. Seo Junho had brought me down there at dawn, when the city was still half asleep and the lagoon outside lay flat and pewter gray. He stood behind a table covered in weapons, sorting through them with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. His hair was still damp from the shower, falling slightly across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than the weight he carried would suggest. If you are going to survive what's coming, he said without looking up, you need to know how to protect yourself. I thought that's what an entire security apparatus was for. My people cannot be everywhere simultaneously. And if the last 2 days have demonstrated anything clearly, it is that everywhere is not actually safe. He picked up a compact pistol, checked the chamber. Set it down. Looked at me. I am not interested in keeping you helpless. Only present. He picked the pistol up again and held it out. Your stance will be wrong. We'll correct it. It was, and he did. He came around behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body against my back, his arms coming around to reposition my grip. Every adjustment was precise and clinical. Every point of contact felt like a live wire. Feet shoulder width, he said against my ear, his voice dropping low. Bend your knees. You're holding yourself rigid, like you're bracing against the gun before it fires. Relax into it instead. His hand slid down my forearms, repositioning them incrementally. I tried to focus on the paper target at the end of the range. Tried very hard not to notice the way his presence at my back felt like something I had been missing without knowing I was missing it. Breathe, he said. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. The shot comes on the exhale. Squeeze, don't pull. I squeezed. The pistol kicked in my hands. The report was deafeningly loud even with protection. The bullet went wide, concrete wall, 2 feet left of the target. Better than I expected for a first shot. I could hear the faint smile in his voice. Again. We spent an hour like that. His body behind mine, his hands correcting my form, his voice patient and unhurried in a way that contradicted everything I thought I knew about him. By the end, I was hitting the target center mass more often than not, and something in me had settled, not into comfort exactly, but into a kind of quiet determination. When he finally stepped back, the absence of his warmth felt immediate. You're a natural, he said. Or just desperate enough to learn fast. Both, probably. He moved to the wall where maps and photographs had been pinned, satellite images of a compound, surveillance photos of gates and guards. Now. The wedding. I crossed my arms and looked at the images. The Fontaine estate was sprawling, golden walls, manicured grounds, a main house that looked transplanted from somewhere older and more European. You want us to walk in there? In the middle of people who want us dead. Walk in as guests. The Fontaine wedding list has been assembled from Lagos's entire upper tier, business, political, cultural. I have contacts in the Korean business diaspora here who can place us as legitimate invitees. We'll attend as a couple. Investors from Seoul with West African interests, establishing connections. They'll recognize you. Amaka and Junesio know my face. They don't know yours well enough to identify you in formal wear, with professional hair and makeup, on the arm of a man they believe is dead or hiding. He turned from the wall to face me. You'll be my entry. My distraction. My legitimacy inside the room. You get me through the ceremony. And once we're inside? We expose everything. I have the recording from the Ivory Pavilion's security system, Amaka's voice, giving the order, time-stamped and indisputable. We play it for the room. We present the genetic evidence regarding the pregnancy. We let the families turn on each other. And in the chaos, his expression completed the sentence with a cold finality. In the chaos, you eliminate the threat. Permanently. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who had held a gun to my chest 48 hours ago was now asking me to trust him with my life at the center of enemy territory. What do you need me to do? I heard myself ask. He moved forward, his fingers coming up to brush my cheek with a gentleness that still surprised me every time he chose it. Be exactly what you were in that restaurant. Someone willing to save a stranger's life when it cost her everything she had. I'm terrified. I know. His thumb traced along my jaw. Fear and courage aren't opposites, Amara. Courage is being terrified and moving forward anyway. You've proven you have that. More than once. We were standing very close. The training room was quiet around us. If we go to that wedding, I said softly, and everything goes wrong. We die together, he said. Like a vow. But I don't plan on dying. And I don't plan on letting anything happen to you. Not again. You can't promise that. Watch me. And then he was kissing me. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was the accumulated pressure of everything that had been building since I had pressed that folded receipt into his hand across a restaurant table, the fear and the fury and the impossible gravitational pull of two people who had survived the unsurvivable side by side. I gasped against his mouth, and he used it, deepening the kiss until thought dissolved and there was only the solid reality of his hands framing my face, his body pressing forward, the taste of him, dark and deliberate, like everything else he did. The door to the training room burst open. We broke apart, both breathing hard. One of his guards stood in the doorway, speaking urgent Korean. Seo Junho's expression shifted in an instant, desire to deadly focus, the transition so fast it was almost frightening. What is it? I managed. News from the Fontaine estate. He was already moving toward the door, his hand finding mine, pulling me with him. Junesio has sent out formal wedding invitations. And he included a personal message. For you? A personal invitation. Front row seat to watch him claim everything I built. His smile was savage and brief. He thinks I won't show. Because showing up would be insane. Of course it's insane. He pushed through the door, pulling me into the corridor. That's precisely what makes it work. 3 days. That was all we had before the wedding. 3 days in which Seo Junho moved through the safe house like a precisely wound piece of machinery, briefing his people, reviewing intelligence, preparing identities, acquiring what he needed for the plan he'd outlined with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before. 3 days in which I learned to shoot with something approaching competence, learned the layout of the Fontaine estate from satellite images, learned the names of Junesio's key lieutenants, and learned, in the quiet hours after midnight, that the man I was sharing a safe house with read poetry. Korean poetry, classical and melancholy, the kind that sounded like water moving over stones even when I couldn't understand the words. He caught me watching him read once and closed the book without comment. But he didn't put it away. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of a bathroom mirror in a dress that felt like wearing someone else's life. Midnight blue silk, long-sleeved, elegant and precisely fitted. It looked like something a woman who belonged at a society wedding would wear. It looked nothing like a uniform. Ballistic weave in the bodice, Seo Junho said from behind me, making small adjustments to the fabric at my shoulders. It won't stop a direct hit, but it significantly reduces the damage at close range. I looked at my reflection. Professional makeup had transformed my face, dramatic eyes, strong brows, bold lips. My braids had been styled into an elegant upswept arrangement, and the earrings Seo Junho had placed in the case on the counter were not just decoration. Microtransmitters, he said, seeing my expression as I picked them up. My team can track your position inside the estate in real time. So I'm both a guest and a target acquisition. You're my partner. He met my eyes in the mirror, and something in his expression had shifted since the training room 2 nights ago. Something more permanent than tactical. There's a difference. He looked devastatingly composed in a charcoal suit, colored contacts turning his distinctive dark eyes to a warm brown, his hair styled differently, a subtle prosthetic scar along his jaw. The disguise was minimal but effective. Amaka and Jun Seo had last seen him in the chaos of the Ivory Pavilion or in years-old photographs. This version of him, calm, slightly different in the small ways that mattered, would hold long enough. A knock at the door. One of his men entered with a tablet. Seo Junho looked at the screen and his expression went entirely still. He turned it toward me. The photograph on the screen was clinical and unambiguous. A velvet box. Inside it, a severed hand wearing a gold band with Korean characters on the inside. Jun Seo received it an hour ago, the guard confirmed. I forced myself to look. Your mother's ring. Jun Seo's mother died in childbirth, Seo Junho said. My mother raised him as her own son until my father exiled him. She loved him genuinely, the way she loved everything, without calculation. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it. He repaid that love by trying to destroy everyone she protected. The ring is a message. A simple one. He closed the tablet. Looked at me. Now he knows I'm coming. The question is whether his pride will let him cancel the ceremony. It won't, I said. I was certain of it, the way Amaka had smiled across the restaurant, the way Jun Seo had worded that personal invitation. These were people who believed their own mythology too completely. He won't cancel. It would look like fear. No, Seo Junho agreed. It would look exactly like what it is. He checked the weapon holstered beneath his jacket, then retrieved the compact pistol that had been fitted into a hidden panel in my dress. He held it out. You remember what I told you. Don't hesitate. Shoot first. And don't apologize after. He placed it in my hand and then kept his hand around mine for a moment, the weight of both our grips against the grip of the weapon. Are you ready? I thought about my mother in her hospital suite with the better equipment and the specialist on call. Thought about the Ivory Pavilion and the wine vault and 7 words folded into quarters. Thought about everything I had been before 3 nights ago, invisible, exhausted, serving wealth I would never touch to people who would never see me. Yes, I said. The drive to the Fontaine estate in Ikoyi took 20 minutes through Lagos afternoon traffic. We passed through the first security checkpoint with the ease of money presenting itself to more money, our false names on the guest list, Seo Junho's contacts in the Korean business diaspora having done their work precisely. No one looked at us twice. We were simply 2 more people dressed expensively, moving with the casual authority of people who belonged. The ceremony was set up in the estate's grand hall, a space of high ceilings and white roses, hundreds of chairs arranged facing an altar that had been constructed with the kind of attention to detail that could only come from someone who understood that this ceremony was about theater, not love. Guests moved through the foyer in designer clothing, speaking about things that had nothing to do with the violence being prepared just beneath the surface of the day. I spotted Amaka immediately. She was near the ballroom entrance, receiving guests, radiant in a gown that shimmered like the inside of a pearl. She looked nothing like the woman I had glimpsed through wine racks giving orders in the dark. She looked like joy itself, curated and placed on display. Her eyes swept over me as we passed through the receiving line. Nothing. Not a flicker. A polite smile, a slight nod, the practiced dismissal of someone categorizing us as unimportant. She didn't see me. Good, Seo Junho murmured against my ear as we took our seats 6 rows back. Stay exactly like that. Bored, polite, slightly distracted. You belong here. I kept my expression easy as the hall filled around us. The processional music began. Bridesmaids moved down the aisle in pale gold, and then Amaka appeared at the far end, and the room collectively drew breath. She was extraordinary, and she was entirely false, and only I and the man beside me understood both of those things simultaneously. At the altar, Jun Seo waited. Seeing him in person for the first time, I understood immediately why he was dangerous. He had Seo Junho's bone structure, the same jaw, the same way of occupying space, but where Seo Junho's eyes held depth and the weight of damage, Jun Seo's held only appetite. He looked at Amaka the way someone looks at a crown being carried toward them on a velvet cushion. The officiant, a replacement for the original priest, clearly, given what Seo Junho had sent to Jun Seo that morning, began the ceremony. Standard words about devotion and fidelity, each one ringing hollow in a hall where marriage was a hostile takeover in formal wear. Seo Junho's hand found mine. His grip was firm. Almost, he said, barely audible. He pulled out his phone with his free hand, typed briefly, hit send. The screens positioned around the hall, meant to carry close-ups of the happy couple to the outer rows, flickered. Went dark. And then came back with something else entirely. Amaka's voice filled the hall. The recording was clear, the ivory pavilion wine vault, the timestamp visible in the corner of the security footage now playing on every screen. Her voice giving the order. Her face, caught by a camera I hadn't known existed, moving through the restaurant toward the back office where the hit team had been staged. Her smile at table 1 while her assassins moved into position behind her fiancé. The room went from suspended attention to chaos in the span of a breath. Guests surged to their feet. The Fontaine family elders, seated in the front rows, turned toward the screens with expressions that moved through confusion and into something murderous. Jun Seo's face had gone white, then red, fury distorting the composed mask he had been wearing. Who did this? His voice cut across the noise of the hall. Who dares? I do. Seo Junho stood. The entire hall went silent. He reached up and removed the colored contacts with a single smooth motion, revealing the dark, unmistakable eyes that half the people in this room had seen in some context, across some table, in some photograph. He straightened his jacket and walked calmly down the center aisle toward the altar, his hand releasing mine as he moved forward. Hello, brother, he said. Did you miss me? The room exploded. Fontaine soldiers went for weapons. Seo family enforcers positioned throughout the hall responded in kind. Wedding guests screamed and stampeded for exits, and Seo Junho walked through the center of all of it with the absolute composure of someone who had decided this was happening and had therefore made it so. You're dead, Jun Seo snarled, his voice cracking with something that was trying very hard not to be fear. I watched. You watched what I needed you to watch. Seo Junho stopped 10 feet from the altar. Did you really believe I'd hide somewhere that your informants could reach me? Amaka's face had turned to chalk. Jun, I can explain. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. Medical records. Can you explain the genetic testing confirming that the child you're carrying belongs to Jun Seo? That you have been his lover for the better part of a year while planning our engagement? He let that land, watching the Fontaine elders in the front rows. The wedding is a fraud. Junesio Kwan has been exiled from the Seo family for 5 years. He has no claim to Seo territory, Seo assets, or the Seo name. This marriage would have been invalid from its inception. Junesio moved. Not toward Seo Junho. Toward me. The gun came out of his jacket and leveled at my face across the hall, and time went slow and strange the way it had in the storage room, every detail sharp and separate, like beads on a string I could count. Seo Junho starting to move, putting himself between me and the barrel. Amaka's hand reaching toward something hidden in her bouquet. The pistol pressed against my hip through the silk of my dress. I moved before I decided to move. My hand found the weapon, drew it in the single smooth motion that 100 repetitions in the training room had made automatic. Raised it. Exhaled. 3 things happened simultaneously. Junesio fired. I fired. The hall exploded into open warfare. The impact hit me in the center of my chest, the ballistic weave stopping the bullet but not the force of it, driving the air from my lungs and knocking me back a step. I didn't fall. Junesio was not as fortunate. My shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and driving him hard to the floor. His weapon clattered away across the marble. Then chaos consumed everything around us, Fontaine soldiers and Seo enforcers opening fire, wedding guests surging and screaming and collapsing the careful architecture of the ceremony into pure survival. Seo Junho grabbed me, pulling me behind a marble column as rounds tore through the space where we had been standing. You shot him. His voice held something I hadn't heard from him before, not pride exactly, but close to wonder. You actually shot him. You told me not to hesitate. Are you hit? I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the bruise already forming beneath the ballistic weave, deep and spreading. The dress held. Is it always going to feel like being kicked by a horse? Probably. He leaned around the column, returned fire, dropped a Fontaine soldier who had gotten too close. We need to move. Amaka. She appeared from the side of the altar with a gun in her hand and her wedding dress already torn, something dark spattering the white silk at her hip. Her face had stripped away every performance, leaving only fury and desperation in whatever proportion they arrived at when everything falls apart at once. You. Her eyes found mine across the chaos of the hall. You were supposed to die in that basement. You were nobody. I was invisible, I said. There's a difference. She raised the gun. There was no ballistic weave between my face and the barrel. No time for Seo Junho to reach me. No last-minute salvation from any direction. So I didn't wait for one. I threw myself forward, inside her reach, grabbing her wrist and forcing the weapon up and away from me. The gun discharged, the shot going somewhere harmless above us. We struggled, she was stronger than she looked and far more desperate, and desperation has its own physics. My free hand found the knife hidden in her bouquet. Small and sharp and not meant for flowers. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I survived. The blade found the gap between her ribs, and the gun fell from her hand, and she looked at me with an expression that was almost confusion, like the answer to a question she had been too proud to ask. She stepped back, and the white silk of her gown bloomed red, and she crumpled to the marble. You, she said. You're just a waitress. I was a waitress, I said. Now I'm something else. Seo Junho materialized at my side, his hand closing around mine, pulling me back from where Amaka had fallen. The Fontaine soldiers were in full retreat, the Seo enforcers moving through the hall with systematic efficiency, eliminating the remaining threats. Junesio lay where he had fallen, blood pooling beneath him, still breathing. We ran for the garden exit, bullets chasing us through white roses. We made it to the waiting SUV at the perimeter wall. Tumbled inside. The driver took off before the door had properly closed. Behind us, the Fontaine estate burned. Whether from fires started in the chaos or deliberately set, I didn't know and couldn't bring myself to ask. I watched the smoke rising into the Lagos evening sky and felt nothing that resembled guilt. Only the deep, bone-level exhaustion of someone who has been surviving at full capacity for 3 days straight. You killed her, Seo Junho said quietly, after a long time. Amaka. You did it yourself. Yes. How do you feel? I waited for the crushing weight of it. The horror. The sudden understanding of what I had done. Instead, what I found when I looked inward was something simpler and more honest than either of those things. I feel like I survived. I looked at my hands, finding them clean. Is that terrible? His arm came around me, and I let myself lean into his chest, pressing my face against the fabric of his jacket. His heartbeat was steady beneath my ear, fast still, but evening out, the body's own accounting of what it had survived. What happens now? I asked. Now we rebuild. His hand moved through my braids slowly. The Seo network is intact. The Fontaine alliance is fractured without Amaka or Jun Seo to hold it. The threat that was built over the past 18 months collapses in their absence. A pause. And you? What about me? He pulled back enough to look at me, and what was in his face was something I hadn't seen there before, not calculation, not the cold management of leverage, but something open and slightly unguarded, like a door left ajar by accident. I would like you to remain, he said. Not as my informant. Not as leverage. Not as something I own because of your mother's medical debt, which is hereby forgiven without condition. He held my gaze. As my equal. My partner. If that is something you are willing to choose. You're forgiving the debt? I should never have used it as I did. He looked, briefly, like the thing the word uncomfortable was invented for. It was effective. It was also wrong. Your mother's care is yours unconditionally, regardless of what you decide. Outside, Legos blurred past the windows, all light and noise and the ordinary, relentless forward movement of a city that had been doing this long before any of us arrived and would continue long after. What about my old life? I asked. What about it? You can return to it if you choose. I will ensure your safety and your mother's care regardless. He turned toward the window. But I think you know, as I know, that the person who walked into the Ivory Pavilion 8 nights ago no longer exists. What you've been through these past days does not unknow itself. The question is only whether you face what comes next alone or beside me. I thought about the girl who had stood in the wine vault with a bottle in her hand and a decision to make. I thought about the woman who had pressed a pistol to a crime lord's chest and told him to pull the trigger. I thought about my mother's hand warm in mine in the hospital room, and the weight of borrowed sweatpants in a room with barred windows, and the feeling of being taught to shoot by a man who had simultaneously threatened my life and arranged her care. I thought about all of it. Together, I said. Something eased in him. Not dramatically, Seo Junho was not a man built for dramatic ease. But something real and permanent, released its grip. Together, he agreed. The stronghold by the lagoon felt different when we returned that night. Less like a fortress. More like a place that might, with time and effort, become something else. I moved through the penthouse slowly, taking in the details I hadn't had the presence of mind to notice the first time, books stacked on a low shelf, Korean titles I couldn't read but recognized as poetry from the quality of their worn spines. A half-finished game of Jengi on a side table. A photograph on the windowsill, a woman with kind eyes and a warm, unguarded smile, wearing a yellow dress in what looked like a garden somewhere in spring. My mother, Seo Junho said from behind me. I had already known that. She had his jaw, but none of the heaviness he carried in it. She looked like someone who had decided that the world deserved her warmth regardless of what it had given her. She was beautiful. She was extraordinary. He came to stand beside me, looking at the photograph. She died when I was 15. Cancer. She spent the last 2 years of her life making sure I knew there was more to existence than what my father was building me for. That I had the capacity to choose something other than what I had been trained toward. He was quiet for a long moment. After she died, I stopped believing her. I set the photograph down carefully. And now? He looked at me instead of answering directly. Which was itself an answer. You should sleep, he said. Your body has been running on adrenaline for 3 days. The crash will come. Is that your way of taking care of me? It is my way of being practical. But the corner of his mouth moved. Rest, Amara. Tomorrow we begin the work of what comes next. I slept in the guest room again that night, choosing it deliberately, choosing the pace of things, choosing what I controlled when so much had been out of my hands. But I left the door unlocked this time. At some point in the early hours, I heard quiet movement in the corridor. Footsteps pausing outside my door. Not threatening, just present, the way a person pauses near something they are deciding how to approach. Then the footsteps moved on. I smiled in the dark. In the morning, I found coffee outside my door. Perfect temperature, the way I had mentioned once in passing that I liked it. No note. No explanation. Just coffee. 3 months later, my mother opened her eyes. The doctors called it a miracle, with the particular embarrassed quality of people who prefer not to use that word but find themselves without a better one. Seo Junho called it better equipment and superior medical management. I called it grace, the kind that doesn't ask whether it's been earned before it arrives. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed when she surfaced, holding her hand the way I had done 100 times while she slept. Her fingers tightened around mine before her eyes fully opened. The first thing she said, in a voice rough from weeks of disuse, was my name. Amara. I couldn't speak for a full minute. I just held her hand and shook. Where am I? She whispered, looking at the unfamiliar luxury of the private suite. Safe, I managed. You're safe, Mama. Everything is going to be okay. And for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I believed it with my whole body. The stronghold by the lagoon was no longer only Seo Junho's fortress. We had not made it soft, that would not have been honest to what either of us was, but we had made it inhabited. My mother recovered in the East Wing, which had been converted to a proper medical suite, her specialist visiting 3 times a week. Seo Junho visited her too, with a formality that gradually, over weeks, gave way to something warmer. They played aware together on Tuesday afternoons. She beat him consistently. He came back every week anyway. The Seo operation continued. Some things would take years to change and some things would never be made clean, that was the truth of it, and I had stopped trying to find a language that made it otherwise. But there were also legitimate businesses expanding, resources moving toward places they had never reached before, and a man who read poetry in Korean at midnight and was slowly, carefully learning to be something other than the weapon he had been built to be. Not redemption. He would be the first to say it wasn't that. But something. On a warm December evening, almost exactly 1 year after the night I folded a receipt into quarters in the basement of the Ivory Pavilion, Seo Junho found me standing at the window in the penthouse, watching the Lagos Lagoon catch the last light of the day. Any regrets? He asked, coming to stand behind me. I leaned back against him. His arms came around me without hesitation. Not one. Not even the part where I held a gun to your chest? Especially not that part. It showed me exactly who you were in a crisis. I felt him exhale, half laugh, half something more complicated. I needed to know that. And what did you conclude? I turned in his arms to face him. In the window light, with the water behind him and the year's worth of careful choices between us, he looked like someone who had started to believe what his mother had always told him, that he could be more than what he had been made for. I concluded, I said, that you are the most infuriating, most complicated, most improbably decent person I have ever had the misfortune to save. He kissed me. Slow and certain, the way he did everything when he wasn't fighting for his life, with total commitment and no wasted motion. Outside, the city blazed on below us. Lagos in full voice, the way it always was. The lagoon caught the dying light and threw it back in fragments. Somewhere in the East Wing, my mother was probably beating Seo Junho's most senior guard at aware and laughing about it. The violence was still out there. The enemies who circled a power like his never fully disappeared. There would be more nights, more decisions, more tests of what we were individually and together. But we would face them the same way we had faced everything since a waitress pressed a folded note into the hand of a dangerous man and changed both their lives in 40 seconds. Together. Monster and witness. Survivor and the thing that survived beside her. King and the woman who had looked at his kingdom and chosen it with her eyes fully open. The lagoon glittered below. The city moved. Inside, we were still. And in the quiet between us, in the space built from everything we had survived and everything we had chosen, we ruled. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know why I can't stop telling these ones. This is what Velvet Tales is built for, the stories that live at the intersection of power, culture, and love that refuses to be simple. If this moved something in you, if you found yourself in Amara or in the impossible space between who Junho was trained to be and who he became, then you're exactly who I make these for. Subscribe to Velvet Tales, leave a comment telling me what part hit you hardest, and share this with one person who needs a story tonight. I'll see you in the next one.